I'm reminded in the writer of the book of Hebrews, in the 12th chapter, tells us in verse 2, I believe, that we are to sit with endurance as the lessons are set before us. Close enough. I truly am thankful to you for staying this afternoon throughout the afternoon, and as these things do, they often run longer than we anticipate, and I appreciate you staying. I know some had other places to go, and you might even prefer to be someplace else, but you're here, and you're here this afternoon, and I just think if you weren't here, I'd be here by myself, so there we are. I've been given the opportunity to speak to you about this great old hymn, Nearer My God to Thee. I can't help but think in the many comments that have been made in the recent hours as we have spent together here last evening and today, and the many comments about many things that are going on in the church today, and if we paralleled them next to many of the denominational happenings, we would find that they face similar things in their various situations. Yet we face it within the concept of the church, and we believe ourselves to be different and unique, which we are. And somebody says, why are you unique? I said, because we continually search for the truth, and we continually strive to apply that truth when found. I believe the greatest need that we have and the greatest desire we must have and what we must continually grow in is that of our proximity to God, in knowing the mind of God and applying the mind of God. When we know the mind of God, know who He is, and know as much as we can in our feeble ways, an understanding of what is in the mind of God for us and for our lives and our happening, many of the questions that we have will disappear. We won't have the struggles that we presently have in dealing with situations within the worship and the context of the worship or the application of our daily lives and our relationships with other people. But we, knowing the mind of God more and more, will be able to apply far better into our lives the things that He would want and have us to do and to be without question and without regard to man or others. Today we talk about this great hymn. I can't help but think about another great hymn, which is also one of my favorites, is Jesus, Keep Me Near the Cross. And as we are drawn nearer and nearer to the cross, we are nearer and nearer to God. And in that proximity, we are reminded of who we are, but we are also reminded of whose we are. Clifton Gaines was the president of Harding University when I was a student there. Every now and then a student would get into trouble and that student would have to be dismissed from the school. Without exception, Dr. Gaines would step to the stage as we would come together for chapel service, and he would talk about this situation and why a student had to be removed. After the removal of the student or the statements regarding the removal of the student, he would say, young people, please remember who and whose you are. Nearer my God to thee. James reminds us in James chapter 4 and verse 8, draw near to God and He will draw near to you. We can't help in thinking about this old song, but relate it as it has been related so many times to an incident in 1912 when the great luxury liner Titanic went down. It is told that they were playing that song, the band or orchestra was playing that song as the ship neared its demise and sank into the depths of the ocean. I can't help but think about those souls that were on that ship, whether they were playing actually the melody of the song as we know it or not, as they knew that their lives were almost certainly about to end. And the proximity to God and the thoughts about that with their imminent demise, what sentiment could be more appropriate for the souls facing their own mortality of that hour, reaching out to that God, nearer my God to thee, nearer to thee. Such is the way a child would sink deeply into the caress of a loving mother, so the soul that longs for its embrace of its loving Father, comforting, secure, giving, caring God. I think it is not only at the obvious presence of a death that seems to be imminent that we search for that longing to be near to God, for it is in the recognition of our daily lives, I think, that we can best see our longing for God. I think there is a clear realization within us that we are but small in our universe. In that recognition, and the small segment that we draw into the great picture of life, it is not that we see ourselves as insignificant in any way, but I believe in seeing how small we are, it makes us long for a greater existence and seeking that which will give us that greater existence. As sorrow helps to bring into us that desire and that relishing of joy when it comes, so do our own limitations help us to see that need for that which is far greater than us, for the security, the comfort that only a great and enormous, magnificent, that is awesome God can provide. This thought is colorfully, I think, expressed in a unique way in the writings of Euripides. Had he not turned us in his hand and thrust our high things low, and shook our hills as dust, we had not been this splendor, and our wrong, an everlasting music for the song of earth and heaven. If it were not for God, we would not be able to be what we are. I think the appeal of this great old hymn is that it projects the recognition of our own human conditions within the scope of our limits and needs. It is kind of a call to God that we should come to know Him, and in that knowing of Him, be secure, comforted, strengthened, and blessed with His presence. This very song is drawn from the incident in the life of Jacob in Genesis 28, as he is fleeing, in a sense, from his brother, yet sent by his parents to find a wife among their kinfolks. There, in the visionary experience that transpires, we see the things that happen to him, the ladder to heaven, the awakening of realizing he has been in a great presence. We see Jacob awaken from his dream and realizing what he's experienced and how unique it is. And with that realization, he acknowledges that that place is quite special, establishing that monument there, calling it Bethel, or house of God. And it is within the climactic expression that these words and this music, this great old hymn, draw us, direct us, and encourage us. Sarah Flowers Adams was a poet and a hymn writer. She lived only 43 years in her life, and yet in those short 43 years, she may have been able to touch more lives than if she had lived 80 plus years in another life. Her compositions, her poetic and lyrical compositions were many, but the words of this hymn are the ones that are most recognized in association with her. The composition was a result of a request by her Unitarian minister, because he was going to preach on Genesis 28, verses 10 through 22, on the particular event that we've already mentioned. She pondered, she absorbed the text and recognized there was something she could do. She gathered, as I would say, the ambiance of the text, and with her poetic skill, with her artistic nature, she brought together the words that we know as this great hymn. Drawing to mind the dream of Jacob, we can visualize that ladder to heaven within the words that are expressed there. There is that approach to God. There are the angels that are coming and going. There is the awe-inspiring picture of the human element brought into the very presence of deity, that is God. With her composition completed, her own sister Eliza provided the original music with it. It was given to the minister. He was thrilled with it, and the congregation began to use it and sing it. But the words of this song did not gain great attention until Lowell Mason, noted for some of the most beautiful hymns that we know, such as When I Survey the Wondrous Cross and My Faith Looks Up to Thee, wrote music specifically for these words, and that garnered a great deal of attention to this, and it became one of the finest hymns that we know, and it has often been stated as the finest hymn ever written by a woman. But whether it was written by a woman or a man, that seems insignificant to me. The collaboration makes for us a rich treasure for our own thinking, for our own encouragement, to enhance the daily living and the grasping of our own worship and our worshipful souls. If we attach the song to the story in the Scriptures, we find the verses reflect the things that she sees within that story. The inspiration drawing from that great story in Genesis 28, and from the sending of Jacob out to find his wife, and his traveling seemingly alone, his wanderings there, perhaps by himself for the first time in this particular direction, there to meet people that he may never have known before. It must have been intimidating. It must have been intimidating in the scope of his own direction. And finding one's course alone can be an intimidating matter. We think of the words of Paul as he writes to Timothy, "All else left me, but I did still have the Lord with me. The Lord stood by me." We recognize within this that Jacob awakens from his dream and recognizes now he is not alone. He faces the same task as he had before. He faces the same journey that he had before, but no longer is he alone. He recognizes that God is with him in the proximity to a real God that he recognizes, perhaps more than he ever has before, allows him to have courage to follow the wandering path that is yet ahead of him. Jacob's intriguing pursuits allow us to see the working of God in the life of one who puts his trust in him and gives to us an example of the human struggles of faith combined with the powerful actions of God to make possibilities a reality. As Sarah Adams absorbed the beauty of Jacob's story and put them into words, she was not only able to put down his story, she was also able to visualize for us the plight of every person in every age who seeks a journey with God. The verses of the song follow the events of Jacob's journey into full realization of the trust that he can place in God, even in the parting of this world. Still, they are written somewhat in an allegorical fashion. For as they are read and sung by those of us today as we have here, they are no longer the story of someone else in the past, but they are our own story, the story of each of us and our hearts as we grasp for the faith that will transform and enrich our lives, give them substance and confidence. The heart of the message is the constant and abiding determination of the individual to remain in close proximity to God. If it is in lonely journeys, let God be near. If it takes a cross, let God be near. If it is in the darkness of the night or the realization of the morning sun, let God be near. If it is even in the passing from this world into the arms of He who awaits us, let God be near. There is no place too near to God. He is not something to be grabbed only when recognizably needed. His presence is the warming comfort of the coldest night and the strength to carry on in the hottest day. It is also a twofold embrace, for it is not only the embrace of God to man, but there is also found within this and the encouragement and the recognition of God's calling for us to be close to Him. It may even be more of a calling that we pull ourselves closer to Him, nearer, my God, to Thee. As we apply the messages and the venues of life, we look into the verses as they are even written in our songbooks, and we recognize and follow through the story that nearness to God is and must be the desire, even when it means a sacrifice, even though it may be a cross that saves me. There is His cross and there is our cross. No point is made clearer in Scripture than the fact that Jesus went to the cross for us. The necessity of the sacrifice of Jesus was in order to atone for our sins. Paul's testimony of this event amplifies the love of God that is employed as he stated that when we were still without strength, in due time, Christ died for the ungodly. For scarcely for a righteous man will one die, yet perhaps for a good man someone would even dare to die. But God demonstrates His own love toward us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Romans 5, 6, 7, and 8. After the example of Jesus and His cross, we find the cross that we are each to bear. Jesus stated that coming after Him was done by the one who was willing to deny self, take up the cross, and in His words, follow me, Matthew 16:24. It was His life and blood that Jesus gave so that we might be near, have that proximity to God. It is our recognition of self and of worth that we must surrender. Our crosses are not made of literal wood, but they are made of the aspirations of our selfish desires. The greatest gains we have will often be accompanied by some sort of great loss. For choice is that way, isn't it? When one thing is selected, another is omitted. It is important that we recognize the value of what we seek in order to release that which is ultimately of lesser or losing value. In the words of a recent bestseller, my friends may laugh, the quicker you let go of old cheese, the sooner you enjoy new cheese. God considered us to be of such great value that even the sacrifice of his Son was not too high of a price to pay. Romans 8. There can be no price that is too high for us to pay to be near to God. It is important to notice that the drive of the individual must be, as the refrain of the song, nearer my God to thee, even though it be a cross, even our own cross. Secondly, nearness to God must be the desire, even though it is a time of personal struggle. Jacob's wanderings, his lone travelings, the idea that he is there perhaps for the first time without his family, searching for that which he has no real knowledge of exactly how or what he's going to find. Such a journey into unknown circumstance can fill any heart with fear and a mind with a certain amount of trepidation. To have the comforting security of God with you in those troubling circumstances can allow you to function as you would like to believe that you can, to have God near. In the late 1950s, when tornado warning systems were not nearly as sophisticated as they are today, when I was yet a young child, when storms would come into the general area, the alarms would just sound around town. You had no idea whether there was even literally a tornado or whether it was anywhere near the vicinity in which you were living, and so you heard the tornado siren sound and you just quaked in fear. I remember a spring afternoon when the sirens began to sound as the clouds darkened the sky and there was that eerie sense about things. My older sister and I huddled into the hallway of our house, and being yet small children, we were afraid. We thought we were going to be like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz just any time. I can remember vividly the fear that I had, but I can also remember that fear vanished in a moment. It vanished in the moment that the front door of the house opened and my father walked in. Now, logically, I can now recognize that there was not much he could do about the weather. But such a consideration did not enter my mind that day. I just knew that if he was there and he was with us, he would make it safe for all of us. That's the comfort of the nearness to God and the longing soul. If God is there, there is nothing that we need fear. Dr. Norman Vincent Peale tells the story of a young woman, and a very active young woman who, like Fanny Crosby, lost her eyesight. This woman, though, had gained several years before that, loved the outdoors, lost her eyesight, thinking it might be temporary. Her doctor finally had to tell her it was not. It was permanent. A preacher came to her and told her that this was her cross and it was upon her. She said, "I thought it would crush me." But then when she thought about the words, she said, well, if the cross is near, the Lord is near, my God is near, I will turn my cross into victory and let it lead me forward as a soul. I will not be defeated. I will triumph through Christ who gives me strength. See, it is the nearness to God from which we can draw our strength. And thirdly, the nearness to God is the desire, must be the desire in the realization of blessings that come our way. While often we move in the other direction, it should be a reminder of how close we are to God and how fortunate we are to God to have such blessings from such a benevolent God. Jacob dreamed of a ladder that reached into heaven. At the top of the ladder was God. Jacob could now recognize not only that there is a real and living God, but also that he is vitally interested in him and near to him. Several years ago, a popular song claimed that God is watching us, but it claimed that God is watching us from a distance. The point of the song was that God overlooked our differences and saw us as one. The problem that I fear that might be seen in the song is that God, at a distance, may not have any vital relationship with those who are in need of Him. That ladder to heaven is claimed in the life, the being, the sacrifice of Jesus. Jesus claimed himself as that latter by saying, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me, John 14:6. That access to God is the instrumental factor in allowing comfort in any avenue of life. Access brings to us knowledge. Knowledge brings faith. Faith is the strength that allows us to operate in whatever circumstances we find ourselves living. The writer of the book of Hebrews recognized the value of having such an avenue to God and wrote, seeing we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold fast our confession, for we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but was in all points tempted as we are, yet without sin. Let us therefore come boldly to the throne of grace that we may obtain mercy to find grace to help in time of need. Verses 14, 15, and 16 of Hebrews 4. The opportunity provided by the ladder to the presence of God gives to us the challenge of acting with the manner of life conducive to the presence of God. But it also gives us strength of the behavior and the knowledge of His presence, drawing from the opportunity of an integrated relationship that we find with God. The appropriate and immediate response is that of appropriate praise and worship. Jacob raises his stone monument, calls it the house of God. We turn our heart's praise and devotion, our worship, to Him. And we can worship Him in the knowledge that He is not at a distance, but He is near. And fourthly, nearness to God is the desire when crossing through the portal of death into life. Confidence of where one is going in parting this life is one of the great blessings. I appreciate the statement that Maxie made. It is the blessing of passing from this life and knowing where it is that we are going. And it is the blessing of a close relationship with God. Paul saw the strength of his relationship in life and in death as he stated, for me to live is Christ and to die is gain in Philippians 1 and 21. There may be nothing that gives us more fear in life than the thought of death. Reaching into an unknown over which there is no human power is naturally, I think, a fearful thing. In contrast, though, to know the destination of your passing is to draw and to give comfort. For the writer of the song pictures a journey as one on joyful wing in an upward direction reaches toward that place that has been seen in the eyes of faith. The readiness of departure is most assuredly attached to the knowledge of the one who will take the journey and who will take the journey or make the journey with you, and of course where it is that you are going. Of those who do not have the nearness to God and a positive sense of direction, somebody has written in a somewhat somber poem in at least one stanza of the poem, the day will soon be over, the hours are fleeting past. Soon the darkened night will come, our doom come at last. Paul was most clear in his confidence of his eternal destination. He wrote to Timothy, I know whom I have believed, and am persuaded that he is able to keep what I have committed to him against or until that day, 2 Timothy 1:12. We are reminded that Jesus has taken from us the sting of death, 1 Corinthians 15:55, and replaced it with the comfort of a relationship with God. We know we must die, Hebrews 9, so let the departure from this world with God be ever near us. And in the words of Alfred Tennyson, be able to say, I hope to see then my pilot face to face when I have crossed the bar. The words and the music of this great old hymn have given comfort to those who are contemplating death. And so it is not a wonder that those who knew they were going to die in the cold ocean depths may have reached out to the thoughts of that song as it was even being played during those closing moments. They may have been accorded a comfort in the thought, let God be near. It may be that no song has been more used in funerals through the generations and in memorial services. President William McKinley claimed it as his favorite hymn, and the strains of the beautiful melody were played as he was memorialized following his assassination. While the words were inspired by the events in the life of the great old patriarch, Jacob, the impact may be recognized, I think, even more at a later date. For it is in the final words of Jesus on the cross that we recognize truly the value to him of the nearness to God. Luke 23 and verse 46, he says, "Father, into your hands I commend my spirit." Still, it is not only in the passing from this life that the message has value. It is in the challenge of living which calls to us, draw near to God and he will draw near to you. The value is obvious. And with such a value, the durability and the beauty of the song remains in perpetuity. May we each in desire ever long to be nearer, as the words say, nearer, my God, to thee. Thank you very much.